that are the same as last time, and I'm then going to be adding new elements as we go along. Can I just confirm? Can somebody please just let me know? Can you still see my screen, and is it still showing the presentation? Can somebody just please confirm that? Is the presentation still showing?
Yes, it's displaying.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk generally about privacy, and because there are a number of privacy laws around the world and even in Africa, I'm going to talk about the principles rather than a specific piece of legislation. And I'm going to talk about the provisions in the various laws that we've seen around the world. Sometimes some of the wording changes, but we've seen very much the principles are the same. I'm going to mention some of the challenges that arise because of the different formats and the different number of formats that we might be using in our organizations. We're going to produce a plan on what to do, where to go, some of the things you need to do right now. Whilst I'm talking about that, I will be putting a lot of emphasis on what we can call data mapping or gathering an information inventory. And as we go along tonight, you should see that that's one of the most important things that you should be looking at doing right away. The other thing that's essential is to establish the right people, establish a team to put the program in place, to start your compliance journey, and then a team for the ongoing management of the program thereafter. This is not a once-off implementation. Excuse me, this is a long-term journey. And then I will be using a tool, a software tool, to demonstrate some of the concepts and issues that we've spoken about. If we look at the terminology of the laws, in many countries we see the laws called the Data Protection Act. In the UK, it was originally the Data Protection Act. In the European Union, it's the General Data Protection Regulations. And what that says to us is it's all about protecting information. And it specifically focuses on protecting personal information. But I'd like you to start thinking right up front about all information, not just personal information. And if you're doing this journey, if you're involved in your organizations and you're starting to develop the program, or you're part of the program, then you have an opportunity to say, well, let's apply the protection rules, the information security rules, the classification rules to all information, not just that information that pertains to data subjects or privacy. So you'll see that message coming out strongly when we look at classification. So the first principle is that information must be obtained fairly and lawfully. You can't steal someone's information. If somebody comes onto your website, you can't gather their information without them knowing about it. If you gather their information, you can only use it for the purpose for which you gathered it. So for example, an employee, if you gather your employee's information, you can only use that information for the management of them as an employee. You can't take that information and sell it on to a gambling company or something like that. So only used for the purpose for which it was obtained. Customer information, you can only gather it for the purposes for which they gave it to you. And what that immediately says to us is we need to be specific. We need to be precise, and we need to be deliberate. So before we gather information, we need to have already thought, what is the purpose for which we're gathering it and how we're going to use it. The next principle is that information should be adequate, relevant, not excessive to purpose. And what this principle is saying is only gather the information that you need. So if there is information about let's just say a new employee coming in, it may not be necessary for managing them as an employee to ask about their family life, the number of girlfriends or boyfriends they have. That's totally irrelevant for managing them as an employee. So only gather the information that's needed. And if we think like this, we can start to think, well, there's a benefit to that. Because if we only gather the information we need, it's going to be easier to manage it because we don't have a whole bunch of information that's not necessary. So that says to us, start looking at the forms you use, the way you gather data, the amount of data that you gather, and start asking yourself, is it really necessary to gather all of that? The next thing is the information must be kept accurate and up to date. And once again, from a pure business benefit point of view, if it's customer information, if it's employee information, if it's supplier information, why have information that's inaccurate? So use this as an opportunity to clean up your data. Must be accessible to the subject. And all of the laws talk about data subject rights. And one of the rights is any data subject is allowed to come to you and ask you, what information do you hold about me? Show me. So accessible. Must be kept secure, hence the terminology data protection. And once again, start to think of the formats you've got. If someone's given you information on paper, you've scanned it in, you've got two formats. If they've sent it to you in email as an attachment, you've then got it in both the email and the attachment. If you've printed it out, you've also got it in paper. So the more different versions and the more different formats you've got of the same data, the harder it is to keep it secure, the more risk you are of that information being exposed. And then lastly, from records management point of view, the information must be destroyed when the purpose is complete. So it's saying that in the old days, many organizations were pretty good at retention, but not good at disposition. And now the laws are forcing you to develop sound retention schedules and to stick to it. So not only should we keep information, but when that information has no value, we should be destroying it. And some of the things that stem from that. The first one is accountability. In most organizations, and certainly in most laws that we're seeing, the ultimate accountable person is the head of the organization, the managing director, the chief executive officer, the director general in an organization, in a public sector. And not only do we need to make them aware of their accountability in terms of the law, they're the ones that could be going to jail or having to pay fines. But we also need to allocate responsibilities to the people in the organization who gather data. And that could be call center operators. It could be sales representatives. It could be people in supply chain. Whoever gathers that data is responsible to make sure that it's stored in the right place, that it's gathered correctly, that only the necessary data is gathered, and then IT have a clear role to play in also protecting that information. Once again, if those roles and accountabilities and responsibilities aren't clearly laid out, people aren't going to know what to do. Every employee who gathers, manages, touches personal information has an obligation to protect it. It's not just something that relates to the head of the organization or the head of IT or the head of records management. The next one is processing limitations. And here we're saying processing, and processing means anything that you're doing with data. If you're the one that's capturing it, if you're recording it, if you're storing it, if you're sharing it, if you're extracting information from it, if you're analyzing it, if you're storing it in a system, that's considered processing in terms of the law. So very simply put, if you have it, you're processing it. And we've got to have a reason for it. And we've got to justify that reason. There's got to be a legal basis for processing. And I've put here what I believe to be the most common ones that we see. There are others, but these are the most common legal basis for processing. And the first one is consent. And this is the one that is most visible to most people. People think about consent, and most laws say you need consent. So consent generally is informed and explicit. An informed consent is saying, I need to know that I'm giving you my information. I need to know how you're using it. I need to know who you are. And I need to be able to say, yes, you have my specific consent to do this with my information. It can't be an assumed consent. If you don't tick yes, we assume you consent. It doesn't work like that. So consent is the most common legal basis for processing. The next one, which is also common, is if another law requires you to gather the information. A tax law, an employment law, an occupational health and safety law, a money laundering law. All of those require you to gather personal information. And you can't use the data protection law to try and avoid giving that information. And then the third one, which is really important and very common, is contractual. If as part of the contract, and this could be a contract of employment, could be a contract of supply or sale, or a contract with your customers. In that contract, if they sign that they know what information they need to give you to fulfill this contract, that is a legal basis for processing. So those are the most common ones that we see. And then we also see ones like it's in the interests of the data subject. If they don't give you the information, it's going to prejudice them. And typically that could be, for example, a clinic. If you give your information to the doctor, and the doctor also has to share it with the nurse, who also has to share it with the physiotherapist or the anesthetist, people who are coming in and providing the range of services that you need. Clearly it's in your interests, and that's why that information might be shared. And then there might be other legitimate interests or legitimate bases, but that's a bit too vague for my liking. So generally we'll see one of these four being the legal basis for processing. We've said we're going to gather information. It's going to be a legal basis, and we're only going to use it for that purpose. So we can't use it for some other purpose. So when we gather the information, we must be specifying this is how we're going to use it. So not only we're gathering it by consent or by law, but we must be specific about how we're going to use that information. So the data subject knows I'm giving you this information for this purpose. And that means that if you use it for some other purpose, it's no longer a legal basis for processing. They gave it to you to use for a specific purpose, not some other purpose. So unless it's agreed by, once again, consent or amendment to a contract or something like that, we can't use it for some further processing. Then the information must be accurate, complete. When we gather it, we can't try and mislead the data subject. So we can't tell them it's going to be used for one thing and then we use it for another. And then it should be updated. So we don't want to have information that we capture oneself and then we never update it, so it becomes inaccurate after a while. I see Hamid Ogbara, you're off mute. Please can you, I'll mute you. There we go. So our information must be kept complete and accurate and up to date. Then it's all about openness and transparency. And what that is saying is, firstly, at the time of capture, we have to be telling them who we are and what we're gathering, why we're gathering it, and how we're going to use it. Also, what their rights are as a data subject. So being transparent then, but also at a later stage, because the data subject has a right to know what information we hold about them, then there's another element of transparency there. That they will be able to come to us at some future stage and say to us, we want to know what information you have. And you'll see that this is very closely related to a freedom of information request in terms of some of the freedom of information laws. Security, we've said already, these are all about data protection. So regardless of format, you need to keep it safe. The typical rights that a data subject has are, firstly, to know what information we hold about them, to request that it gets amended if it's incorrect, to request that it gets deleted, to refuse us to process their information. And at any stage, they can take up those rights. So our processes need to be such that allows them to come to the organization at any future stage, say, what have you got about me? Once they've seen it, we want it to be amended, deleted. We don't want you to process it, and we don't want you to use it for direct marketing or purposes like that. Then most of the laws are very specific around data sharing and what we call cross-border processing. And the laws, some are very specific, some less so. The principle here is that they're saying, keep it in country. That's the preference. And the reason being, if for example, you're in Nigeria and the Nigerian law was very strong, which said, no, you can't share it with anybody else. You can only, all the stuff we've spoken about now, you're limited in what you can do with it. If you then sent that border into that information, for example, into the DRC, and I'm just using this as an example, and if DRC had less rigid laws where people could just freely share that information, obviously the rights of that data subject have now been abused. So most laws are very specific, saying you really need to keep it inside your country unless it is processed in another country which has at least the same level of rigidity as your law. And if the information is shared, it must only be shared with valid consent or lawful basis. If we use my example of a clinic,
and also, since we have books now, we have something to discuss about. So this book we just have.
So if you need to share the information with other third parties, you need to get consent, or there must be a lawful basis for doing so. Then if we look at the forms, I've already touched on the fact that the possibility in almost all organizations for having multiple forms of information, it's very real. And typically what happens is somebody gives you information in a form. It could be a paper form, it could be electronic form, it could be something that they've captured on the web, it could be a PDF that they filled in and sent to you. And you need to now take that information and put it into your system, into your HR system or your supplier system or your customer system, where you've now got the data. So now you've got data, plus you've got the electronic document and or the paper document. When the data subject takes up their rights, you need to know all of those places and all of those formats that you've got their data, so that when they ask you to say, what information do you hold about me, you can produce it all, not just some of it. And when it comes time to destroy it, they must be able to destroy all of it. Because if you say, well, I've destroyed the paper, but you've scanned that paper one into an electronic image, if you only destroy the paper, you haven't complied with the law. So it's really important that we start to understand, what information do we have? What formats do we have? Where is it stored? Are there extracts from it? Is there data extracted from it stored in some system? So that once we delete it, we must be deleting everything. And we have to delete it when the purpose for which it was gathered is now finished. And as I've said, at the time of capture, when they're filling in that form, when they're giving it to you, to a call center operator, that's the time that we tell them who we are as an organization, what their rights are, and how we're going to use that information and get their consent. So already we've seen two very important things that we need to do. Well, I've picked on a couple of others, but the two that I really want to stress right now. The first one is we must know our data. What information are we gathering? Who's gathering it? Where is it being gathered? How is it being gathered? And once we know that, we can say, well, if we're gathering it at this part in a particular business process in the branch, for example, then immediately we know that in the branch, the people that are gathering it must use a form which we must update. And on that form, we tell the data subject what their rights are and all the other information. So know your data. Once we start to know and understand our data, we know where it's stored. We make sure that those systems and storage facilities are properly controlled and protected. And we then also know that where we're capturing it, and we can now use this knowledge to improve those data capture forms. What I'm going to present in a moment is just talking to a methodology for gathering some of that information. To say, well, what data do we have? Where is it kept? Who's responsible? And I encourage you at this stage to look at this classification exercise, because you've got to do it. You've got to understand your data to start gathering other information. So what I'm presenting here is it what this could be a simple spreadsheet. I've put it just in a table, but this could be a number of column headings in a spreadsheet. So here, if you had, for example, the records managers amongst you might think of a file encryption. What is this data? And then what is the retention period? How long do we need to keep it? We could also ask at this stage, is there a period where this information is active, where it's frequently retrieved? And now I'm thinking records management, not privacy, not data protection. But if we start to understand this, we can say, well, while it's active, let's store it in the user department. After a year, it becomes semi-active, let's move it to a departmental or a central archive or a central record center. So we can use this approach or this methodology to start gathering and capturing and making rules about information that allows us to manage our information better. Then, from a pure privacy point of view, does it contain personal information? Does it contain special personal information? And that would be things like criminal records, health information, things like that. Where is it meant to be stored? How do we capture it? What are the forms we use to capture it? Who captures it? Who do we share it with? So you can start to see some of these questions relate directly back to the principles and the requirements in terms of the law. Where does it come from? And here we could be saying, does it come from the data subject themselves? Does it come from the third party? And you could even go a step further and say, what is the origination point in our organization? Could be the call center, could be a teller at a bank, it could be supply chain, whoever it might be. Who is responsible as the owner or the custodian of that information? Once again, this is really useful information because too often we see in organizations that somebody says, well, I'm not responsible to keep it, somebody else is. And they think that you're responsible to keep it. So the more that we get specific and capture and document these rules, the better. Is it duplicated somewhere in our organization? Now, how frequently is it retrieved? Not important from a privacy point of view, but really useful for some records management rules. Is it in paper or electronic or both? If it's in paper, do we need to keep the paper, or could we scan the paper and destroy the paper after scanning? Where do we keep it when it's active? Where do we keep it when it's semi-active? Where do we keep it when it's an archive? Does it require a signature? Once again, this is not critical in terms of personal information. But as soon as we ask this, and the answer is yes, we know that it does contain someone's PI because it contains their name and their signature. It also is very useful for our digitalization journey. If we know that a certain type of information requires a signature, that should be an immediate candidate for us to be saying, let's go electronic with this. Because otherwise we know we're going to print it. We know we're going to have multiple copies taken. We know that different parts of the scanning or different parts of the signing process are going to want to keep their copy. So electronic signatures not only helps your digitalization journey, but if done properly, can also help to reduce the amount of duplicates and have significant business process benefit. What is the sensitivity classification? Is it secret, confidential, top secret, public access, restricted? And for most organizations, this is important for other rules, for your, not only for data protection, but for some of the information security laws or requirements that you might have. Who's allowed access? Who's allowed editing rights? Is it the type of information that might be required in terms of a freedom of information request? Is it a vital record, something that we need to take extra vigilance to protect? We can also look at this from a risk point of view and know that some of the laws require a privacy impact assessment to be conducted. And here we can identify and highlight those risks. So this is not absolutely, I'm not advocating you have to do it like this. And also this is not entirely 100%. We see some organizations want parts of this, some wants others. But this really allows you to understand your data and force you to make some of the key decisions and rules that you need to make. So I strongly encourage you, as one of the first things you do, start doing this data classification or mapping or an inventory, or in the privacy world, we would start to call this records of processing activity. I've mentioned multiple formats, and typically what we see is information comes in paper. We keep the paper, but we also take some of the information from that filled in form and restore it in our systems. So straight away, you've got at least 2 versions of it. Then you might scan it. So now we've got 3 versions because you've got an image, and you might use the name as a metadata field. So you've got 4 versions of it. And that's forgetting email and forgetting about copying. So chances are in your organization, you've got at least 5 versions or 5 different formats of personal information. And we've got to get a handle on all of it, not just one of those formats. And very importantly, come the time that we need to destroy it, because the law says we must destroy when its purpose is finished, we must be able to identify all of these instances and then take it and destroy it. So very simply, the steps we need to take. We need to put a team in place to plan this journey. That team needs to include, and I'm going to show you a slide in a moment, all the players who need to have input. And it's not only for the project, but for the ongoing management, responding to queries, identification of breaches and hacks, reporting to the regulator, awareness and training going into the future, recording freedom of information or data protection requests. So it's participation. The structures need to be put in place, not once off, but going into the future too. Probe is really twofold. The first one is to do that data mapping that I've spoken about. And secondly, you should do a current state assessment. Where are we now? Are we ready? Are we compliant to the law? Where are the gaps? What are the things that we need to do to fix those gaps? And we need to have policies and procedures and controls in place. We need to have people who are educated and aware who are in place to handle requests. We need to have our processes for responding to requests and to incidents. Obviously, we need to protect the data. We can only protect the data if we know what data we've got. We need to have a disposal program. We need to have a retention schedule. And we need to make sure that we have systematic disposal once records are no longer needed. And then we have to have the systems in place, a robust, properly controlled enterprise content management system or electronic document and records management system. Something that applies all of the data protection requirements, proper access control, encryption, making sure that only the right people can access it, making sure that people can't just come in and edit documents, making sure people can't steal information from it. So very tightly, properly protected systems. And then this is something that we need to improve on an ongoing basis, which is why we're talking about perfecting it. I mentioned some of the roles and responsibilities, and I see this in a couple of ways. Right up front, everything we do needs to fit in with our legal and governance and risk and compliance framework. So the people responsible for those have a really overarching view of this journey, because we have to comply with the law, non-negotiable. Then as we're putting the program in place, and here when I'm talking program, I'm talking about the privacy journey, not the software technology. We need to have this multidisciplinary group making decisions. So we've got clearly someone from IT, someone from operations, the people who are selling your product or delivering your product or service out there, the reason why the organization exists. They've got to be involved because they're the ones who are gathering data, who are using it. Then if you've got support services like HR and finance and supply chain, they need to be part of it. Legal, compliance, risk, and records management. All of these team people need to be part of the team. These are not decisions that get made by one person. So they're there to make decisions and make sure that you're on the right journey. Then you might break it down into different working groups. You might get people looking at the IT element of it, the records management element of it, people looking at your storage facilities, both paper and electronic, people looking at your business processes to make sure that they identify in those processes where and how you gather information. So this is putting our journey together. Once we've done that, we need to, most of the laws require a data protection officer to be put in place. Someone who takes ultimate responsibility for this journey. That if ever there's a question, if ever someone, a data subject, wants to know who to talk to, this is who they go straight to. And their information gets published in your privacy notice on your intranet, on your internet, sorry. This is the person who handles all responses or requests. But even in a medium-sized organization, they can't do it all alone. So they would normally appoint or designate deputies to handle things on their behalf. This could even be supported further by an information champion or a privacy champion in every department. And that we're seeing a lot of organizations do. Where does this person report? Normally they would report somewhere into legal, governance, risk, and compliance. In some organizations, they report directly into the MD or the CEO or the Director General. A senior person. We also see that sometimes they report into this committee and specifically into the risk leg of the committee. And then you also have to allocate responsibilities to departments. So I mentioned departmental champions. Who in the department is responsible to make sure that information in that department is properly protected? System owners, the owners of your Microsoft 365 environment, or your SAP, or your Oracle, your Sage, your Haskell environment. People responsible to make sure that those systems have the necessary controls and rules built into them. Information security, to make sure that you're protected against viruses and hacking and threats. But not only externally, internal controls, security of your physical record stores. Records management clearly have a role to play. And so important, change management training. This is all about change. One of the things we see done so badly is this. You really have to place strong emphasis on change management on this journey. We need to be educating, doing awareness presentation, telling people what the risks are of responding to, clicking on a link in an email, of going onto dodgy websites. So on an ongoing basis, change management, training, and awareness. We mentioned a system. I'm going to show our system, but I'm doing that mostly to show the approach, to show what can be in place. Obviously, different organizations have their own systems. I'm going to just show you one that's an example. And what I'll do is, as I'm going through, I'm going to emphasize the key things that I believe are just so important. And especially in that is going to be the data mapping and the ongoing management of your data protection journey going forward. Sorry, this is just. The particular part of the solution I'm showing you now is based on the general data protection regulations. There is a version of this for Nigeria. There is a version of this for Kenya, and there is a version of it for South Africa. The reason why I'm showing the GDPR one is that is generally most laws follow the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, and it's the most common one that countries follow. And if you do this, you are most likely 80 or 90% compliant to any law around the world, and you can then tailor it to your specific scenario. So I'm not going to go into all the elements. I'm just going to start off with the DPO, and that's the Data Protection Officer. And I'm just going to show the way that the tool is designed. And very quickly, you'll get an idea of how it assists you in your journey. Right throughout it, it describes requirements. So right up front, you could go and you could answer these questions. We're a public authority or body. Our core activities consist of this. And based on that, it would determine whether you need to appoint a data protection officer or not. This is very specific to GDPR. Then if we look at the checklists, right throughout, there are questions. And if we follow the tool, and we complete everything, we would have done our first assessment. Because straight away, so for example, have we assigned our data protection tasks to various individuals? We can then go down here, we can say, no, we haven't started, it's in progress, it's not applicable, or we've completed it. So straight away, where we say not started or in progress, we know that there's further work to be done. And we then use this as our assessment, which is a legal requirement in most privacy laws. And it also serves as our project plan, because we then know what we need to do. And we can also assign tasks to different people in the organization. So it's for every element of it, there are questions like that. So under here, under compliance, exactly the same sort of questions. Under data subject consent, we have a checklist. So we have all these questions that we would need to answer. And these questions come directly from the laws. So if you had to say, haven't done it, haven't done it, haven't done it, haven't done it, obviously you're not compliant. And then we can print out a report, and we use that report to then say, now what do we need to do? And who's going to do it to become compliant? We can allocate low, medium, or high risk to it. I'm not going to focus on that for today. So there we can do an assessment. Here we can then report on the things. So have we done data mapping? Have we appointed the protection officer? Have we got policies and procedures in place? Are our employees aware? So for everything we are doing, we can produce a report on it and show exactly what our current status is. I'd like to focus on the data map. This is the most time-consuming, and I believe possibly the most important elements to it. And the way we've done this is we've already built in things like the legal basis for processing. So all it becomes is a drop down and ticking on the box. And the way it works is we would say, we list all our departments. So here we've got customer service and finance. You can add another one. So you go in and you list all the departments. Then we say for that department, what type of data subjects do they have information about? So customer service, they've got customer information, they've got prospect information. In finance, they've got service providers. In HR, they would have employees and prospective employees. So we've got the departments who have information, the types of data subjects about whose information they hold. Then for each one of these, we say, well, why do we need that information? What's the purpose for processing? It's to run our operation, for due diligence, for contact management, for customer analysis, service delivery. So we can, and with all of these, we can add our own processing purpose in data subject type. So it's not rigid, it's very flexible to the way we can handle it. Then for this particular purpose, for this data subject type, for this department, what is the legal basis for processing? We have a contract. We have to comply with the legal obligation. We have consent. So there you see 3 examples. We have a contract with them. We have to comply with another legal obligation. We have data subjects consent. So hopefully you can see that what we're really doing here is we are understanding our data, and we're understanding it in the context of the law. Then we ask, where do we get it from? So by that department, by that data subject, and so if we look at customer service, we look at prospects and leads, banking details, we would then say, well, where do we get it from? Do we get it from a data broker? Do we get it via email? Do we get it directly from the data subject as a paper form? So here we would start to say, what are the forms and templates that we use? Is it a web form? So here we've got, is it a physical form? Is it an online form, online transaction, a telephone? Where do we get it from? Do we get it directly from the data subject or from a third party? And here we can list categories. We can create categories of third parties like employee brokers or personnel agents. So we can start to have categories of third parties. Hopefully you can see that by going through this process, we really, really are starting to understand our information. And this becomes what we could then call a record of processing activities. So I'll show you that in a moment. Now we can say, from a governance point of view, have we got the necessary security measures in place? And right throughout, it tells us what needs to be in place. So have we got them in place? Here's our records of processing activities. And what it's done is it's listed that information that we just captured in our data mapping exercise. So it's creating these reports that we can use if ever we need to present to the regulator. Do we do automated decision making? If yes, because most of the laws talk to, if you do this, you need to document it. We use computer system to generate these decisions, etc. We can use this to create a privacy notice that we're going to publish on the website. Once again, this tells us what type of data we gather, legal basis, how we use it. So we can take this information, publish it straight to our website. And in fact, the software allows us to publish directly with this integration tool onto our websites. And then we've not only the external privacy notice, but internally our employee privacy notice. We can create one that all employees would need to acknowledge that they've read and agree to comply with. We can add in we've got a document library, we can add in others. So if we've got other policies like a work from home policy or use of bring your own device policy, we can add those too, and we can then make sure that all employees have actually read and agreed to comply. And we do that here under compliance. We list all our employees. Here we can see hasn't started. I can send them an email, and in that email, I can choose what I'm going to send. So we can have a campaign internally where initially I would say, okay, we're going to send them the data protection program announcement and some data protection training and awareness. And we send that to them. Immediately it would go off to the employee and it would keep track who's opened it, who's read it, who's agreed to comply with it. So at any stage, if a regulator comes to us and says, have you conducted employee awareness? We can say, yes, we have, and here's the evidence. So we're starting to see that we're doing an assessment against all the requirements of the Act. We're producing a checklist as to what we have and haven't done and what we still need to do. We are putting in place the data protection officer, making sure that they're appointed. We're training our employees. We are identifying our data map, the type of information that we've got, where we're gathering it, how we're using it, what the legal basis for processing. If we use third parties to process information on our behalf, we can create a register here of who those people are, who we share it with, and then from an ongoing management point of view, we can do what we call a data privacy impact assessment. If we did a new process, a new system, a new product, we would run a privacy impact assessment, and we would ask at that time all the questions that we've asked right up front here. So this is allowing us to go into the future for new systems, new processes, new products. Then, if there's a data subject access request, somebody comes to us and says, I want to know what information you hold about me. We've got the ability to keep track of all of that here. So we can say, oh, this is a request about access. What information would you like to access? When did we receive it? Who you are, and what is the relationship with the organization? So straight away, we're keeping track of all of the data subject requests that come into our organization. We will keep this permanently. And whether it's for access or correcting it or deleting it or refusing, all of that information we keep in these data subject access requests. And exactly the same with a data breach. If there's an incident, we have the ability to capture the incident, to track it, to say what happened, how we've mitigated the risk, how we've prevented it happening again in future. We can print a letter to the regulator, print a letter to the data subject, and print an incident report. So not only in summary of the tool, it says, what do we need to do? Puts a plan in place to make sure we do. It allows us to do the data mapping, to really understand our data and resolve any gaps there, to make sure that we have the policies and procedures and controls in place, all our employees are trained, and going into the future, we can handle any new product systems we might introduce, any data subject requests, and any breaches. Okay, so that's the system. As I said, it is a tool that can be used in any country, even if you don't have a law yet, and even if it's not 100% yet aligned to your law. Hopefully you would have seen that it gathers all of the necessary things that you need to do. Then I'm about to finish some last comments. What we've seen in implementations around the world, but most specifically from the European Union, this is not trivial. It takes longer than you think. It's more complicated than you think. It generally costs more than you think. And even when countries have introduced a law with a specific compliance date, we've seen that most organizations were treated. And my last message here is treat it as something that you can get benefit from. Don't just do it to comply. Look to see how you can use that classification schedule I showed you to improve your business processes, to understand your data better, to get better overall information governance rather than just data protection. And please treat it as a journey, a program, not a once-off initiative. So that's me. It's I haven't given much time, but we can go, if people want to ask questions, we can go a little bit over our allotted hour. So I am open to any comments or questions that you might want to raise.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Please, if we have any questions, we can put in the chat box. Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Just quick question for me. How do we deal with integration into an existing platforms in terms of the privacy processes? You know, you have an existing technology where you can request for consent. How do we integrate a form into it with this product that you just showed us?
Thank you for that. I'm going to answer that in two ways. And the first answer is a simple answer. The second one is much more complicated. The first one is, if you've got something like, let me just say Microsoft 365, where you've got Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint and Exchange, those tools have built-in compliance ability. They allow you to apply privacy labels. They allow you to apply information sensitivity labels. They allow you to apply retention periods. So many of those systems, or some of those systems, like Microsoft 365, really are geared to doing this. Sadly, others aren't. And most of the products that you when I talk about products, the systems that you might have in place are generally, you know, if you've got legacy systems before your privacy laws came out, many of them are not easily integrated with, if that makes sense. And one of the key things to do here is firstly to identify those systems, to identify the data that you've got in those systems. And not easy, but you might have to do some manual application. So you might have to, in your data mapping, when you identify the systems, as long as you know which systems those records are in, and when I talk about records, I'm talking about database information now. If you know that, and you know that they have certain retention periods, you've now developed the rules, you're going to have to develop a process, a manual process, to go and apply it to those technologies. So I'm going to talk to three scenarios. The first scenario, something like Microsoft 365, it's got controls built in, quite easy to comply. The second one is a legacy system where it's hard to retroactively fit it, very difficult. And what you're going to have to do there is know the data that sits in them and have policies, procedures, and processes whereby you constantly check those systems and apply the rules to them. And then the third scenario is probably a bit of a hybrid, where you have some form of enterprise content management system, which has got a robust records management module or part of it. And it's, I almost believe that's mandatory. It's almost, I mean, no law says you have to have an ECM system, but to become compliant, if you've got a single source of the truth, you can apply the rules to that. And it's often relatively easy to use APIs between a legacy system and most of the modern enterprise content management systems. And that's certainly one way you can do it. You build these rules into ECM system, you store all of your electronic documents and records in that system, you apply the rules to that system. But what that doesn't do is it still doesn't address the stuff that's sitting outside of it in email and possibly data sitting in databases. But it's certainly a long, long way to resolving the issue that you described. So hopefully that answer is not a perfect answer, because there is no perfect answer, but those are the three scenarios I see. Any other questions? Any other
Okay, thank you so
hands?
much. Oh, thanks for that answer. I think I have the Juliet was raising up. Please. Oh, no problem. You can unmute yourself, Juliet, and ask your question. Juliet, please.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Doctor. My question is in terms of cultural differences and whether the training has allowed for that. And I know he noted that there's different data protection for Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. But we've seen lately about what is happening in Europe, whereby even some people are saying that the GDPR, has got lots of flaws in it, and especially when UK went out of Brexit situation. So my question is in relating to understanding that in Africa, perhaps we have very simple system of keeping data and record. I know that needs to be improved, but I wanted a simpler way of how we, because many of us use phones and all that. Is only Zoom has only come into existence after the COVID-19. Before, Africans, we weren't really using it. And because of the infrastructure systems in our place, many people use phones. So I just wanted to know if we've got a lot of how we could improve the data protection when it comes to using phone. Thank you.
Juliet, thank you. I want to pick up on two things, two key themes that you described.
Yeah.
Let's talk cultural first. And I think that there are two sides to that. The first one is internal corporate culture, because that's also something that even if we see in a country, there's a, let's say, a certain culture of managing where privacy laws have come in, and the country is saying, yeah, this is important, we've got to do it. But internal to an organization, they don't see it as important. So I think all you can do is focus within your organization. And when I highlighted communications, training, change management, that's exactly what we're talking about. And that's where I think you need to take you need to develop a series of messages tailored to the nature of your organization. And I'm going to start with tailored to the nature of the culture in your organization. And this is such a big reality. Some organizations already take it seriously. Some think it's a joke. Even within an organization, you can see one department who takes it seriously, another one who doesn't. But you've got to raise the importance of it internally to the most senior people. They've got to drive it down. And then absolutely what you said, that messaging, the awareness, the training, has to be geared to your specific situation in your specific organization, in your specific country. So 100% correct. So, and we're not even saying tailored to Africa. It's tailored to your organization, your country. Yeah, even Africa is too broad when it comes to this. So make it very personal, make it very specific. And I think that then also talks to what you said around the phones. And it's so true. You know, we communicate via phone in Africa. It's a reality. But then if that's where the data messages or the data subject information is being kept, it's just another tool, it's just another platform. So as an organization, we need to develop the rules around that. We need to say, if you've got personal information on your phones, take it seriously, treat it seriously, because it could be your information on somebody else's phone that gets, you know, hacked or leaked or exposed around the world. So all I can really say is you've got to tailor it to the specific scenario, your organization, the technologies that you have in your organization, the country that you're in, make it personal. That's all I can really say, but you're absolutely right. I thank you for that. Any other questions? I'm seeing a few comments there, but any further questions?
Okay, thank you so much for the response to the question that was asked. I think I have Lawrence, please. Because of time, I might not take. I don't know how many of us that have questions. I also want to use the chat box, but we have Lawrence Jones.
All right, thank you very much. I have a question, and the question might also inadvertently be for Dr. himself. Well, my name is Dr. Lawrence Jones Essen, and based here in the UK. But I also feel, based on the question that one of the lady from Kenya actually asked about knowledge on information systems, and I believe there are programs which we obviously provide, and I think working in collaboration. The question I want to ask is how is working in collaboration with the Institute of Information Management could be strengthened so that we can also provide training, a short 3-4 days, 5-day training on information system in collaboration with the Institute of Information Management.
So I think, Alexander, you should probably answer that, and you can either do it now or, you know, offline respond to Lawrence, let him know how to handle it, but I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, thanks Lawrence for that input. Okay, yeah. I think we have an announcement section, and an announcement section will be taken by the secretary, and she will give us all those information. Yeah, we have a lot of trainings that we do. Information management, we have 3 layers. Information management professional 1, 2, and 3 before our master's program. We do a lot of the information system trainings, record and information management related to privacy. We do all that in the institute. Yeah, what we do in the institute. Okay, so not to waste much of our time, I would like to call on the president, if he's here, to just give us his remarks before we go to the announcement for the day, before we close the session. Is Mr. President here? Already.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Paul, for that wonderful presentation. I think we've been able to learn a lot, and also been able to reinforce on the last session that we had. I want to say a very big thank you for sharing this knowledge with us. And I believe when next we call on you to also share similar knowledge, you will oblige us. Once again, I want to say a very wonderful evening to us all, ladies and gentlemen, for making our time to be part of this month's webinar. I hope and I look forward to also having and welcoming you in the month of October. Thank you very much.
Then from my side, I'm done. So I'm going to say really appreciate the time and wonderful spending time with you all. And I'm going to hand back to the host to close.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Faraday, if you're here, please help us with the announcement for today, please. Mrs. Faraday, the Secretary of the Institute of Information Management.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Paul, for that wonderful presentation. We look forward to more of that. I will quickly run through the remaining programs of the Institute for this year. We still have a number of induction and infestation. The next one will be coming up in the city of Port Harcourt here in Nigeria, and the date is 15th of October. This will be followed by the Ghana induction coming up on the 29th of October. Then we have the UK induction that will reschedule. That will be coming up 19th of November, and that will be after the Abuja National Summit and induction, which will precede the UK induction on the 12th of November. Then for the USA induction, it's going to be coming up on the 26th of November, while Canada induction is fixed for 10th of December all this year. For as many of us that are not yet part of the Institute who want to become a certified professionals, we will gladly welcome you into the Institute, but you need to send in your CV to the Institute through the membership directorate. Just send your CV to membership@imafrica.org. The CV will be evaluated and you will be admitted appropriately after you must have fulfilled all the necessary obligations and conditions. You can also check our Institute website for more information on our several trainings and certification programs. That will be all for now. Thank you, Mr. And I'll go back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Faraday, our able secretary. If we have any other council members in this meeting, please kindly introduce yourself before we take the group photograph. Please, Izu, please make sure you are ready to take the group photograph, please. Please, we have the council members here. Please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Good evening.
I know Mr. Who's there? Who is speaking?
Good evening. Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Princess. Good
Yeah,
evening.
this is Victor.
It's fine.
This is Victor Buralo. Victor Buralo.
Hello, please. Good evening, Princess Tiwalade. Please, please can go ahead and speak. Someone is interrupting you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being part. Thank you for being part of today's September webinar. Thank you for being part of our September webinar. It has indeed been a rewarding day, And I want to also use this opportunity to thank the presenter, Mr. Paul. That was a great one. We have learned a lot, which was a continuation of the last one you did. We are very grateful to you. And I want to thank everybody, the president, for a job well done. We doing the background work is a thing of hard work. And I want to thank Mr. Anago for moderating in a great way like this, and especially everybody behind the scene of the technical crew. I thank you all. I am Princess Tiwalade Fakunda, the Vice President, and I wish you a restful night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Princess Mafugwa, for that introduction. We have our able secretary was the one that just spoke to us. Mrs. Rhoda Faraday was our secretary who just spoke to us, that made the announcement. And we all know the president of the institute. So not to waste much of our time, because this is 18 minutes past 8. I would like us all to turn on our camera because we want to have the group photograph now. If you don't mind, please turn on your cameras. Izu, please, can you take the group pictures, please? Oh, Mr. President, please assist you. Please, our able president is there.
Please, let us turn on let's turn on our camera for the group photograph, please.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Please give me some minutes, please. Please.
We are waiting.
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Let's turn on our cameras, please. Okay. We're still on it. Okay. I can see some are not putting on their lights. The background are so dark that we can hardly even get to see the faces. Victor, Mr. Patrick, Zeshuku, your background is so dark that we can hardly get to see your face. Kindly put on, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Taking. Picture successfully taken.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We hope to see you at the Port Harcourt induction and Ghana induction and the other inductions. Thank you so much. Have a good night rest. Have a good afternoon for those in America. Those in Canada, this night. Thank you very much. President Tiwalade, Nice to see you again online.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm in America at the moment.
I thank God I said good afternoon. That was good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at the various induction locations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mrs. Faride, for that detailed announcement.
Enjoy your stay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
We hope to join
Thank you
you.
and good night. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, sir.